people of Egypt topple a dictator.
President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as president of Egypt. That's a great day in Egypt!
And transform a nation. Now, the difficult work begins. Who will lead the nation? And will Egypt's relationship with the U.S. change? Will he put the lost generation to work? How? Or will the new Egypt suffer? Tonight, we'll hear from the country's finance minister and also one of its leading businessmen. And could Egypt and Tunisia be just the beginning of dramatic change in the Mideast? Tens of thousands rally for reform across the world's most volatile region, and their rulers crack down and scramble to hold on to power. Live from Cairo, this is a Bloomberg Television special report, Egypt Emerging. Hello and welcome to this Bloomberg special report. I'm Margaret Brennan reporting live from Cairo. Tonight we're going to look at just what this revolution means for Egypt, for this country, and for the world. We'll take you to the streets and to the markets of Cairo to tell you those stories. We'll bring you an exclusive interview with the Egyptian finance minister and the CEO of one of this country's biggest banks. All of that ahead in this special report, but first let's bring you through the top headlines that we're watching right now. Today here in Egypt, the Egyptian army dissolved the nation's parliament and suspended its constitution. The military is promising its rule will be temporary for 6 months, maybe even less, if general elections take place. Egypt's central bank has ordered the country's banks closed again tomorrow because of protests by some bank employees. And the country's stock exchange has delayed its reopening until Wednesday. It's been closed since January the 27th. And there are new signs of contagion this weekend across the Middle East. In Algeria, thousands of citizens defied government warnings to rally in the capital for reform. As many as 26,000 riot police were deployed to quash the rally. In Yemen, police armed with sticks and daggers beat back thousands calling for political reforms and the resignation of the president. Now, I want to bring in my colleague Lara Satrakian, who has been telling this story really since the revolution, the uprising began here in Egypt these past few weeks. And we've been working on trying to gauge what's happening on the streets now. And really the headlines say it. Misr Ba'da al-Thawra, after the revolution, the path to the future. And we're trying to figure out, are we on that path?
Yeah, and just walking around today, we couldn't tell whether it was a party or just sheer pandemonium. Still this intense emotion. One man telling me this is everything he's ever wanted and just a chance to rebuild this country from scratch. That's what it looks like from the ground. And people just saying that this is a moment of a lifetime for them. A sense here that they really want to embrace this change. They want that democratic reform. And they're grateful for this smooth, or what they see as a smooth transition under the army's watchful eye. Just trying to keep the peace here after so much violence.
And the question, transition to what? And back to business, but not back to normal. We know that much. But let's go now to Washington. Our Hans Nichols is standing by with the latest on President Obama, some key conversations that he's been having as the United States looks east and wonders about contagion. Hans?
Margaret, driving much of the president's calculation on his public comments over these last 20 days has been his ability to preserve those private lines of communications with other regional leaders. And you saw the beginning of that happening this weekend. He calls the leader of Turkey, the king of Jordan, as well as the prime minister of the United Kingdom. He used those calls to reassure allies that Egypt's transitional regime will honor international obligations. That means one thing: the peace treaty with Israel. The line from the White House is that that is going to be sanctified and secure with this new regime. It's yet another way the president is trying to push the military caretaker government into doing what the White House views as the right thing. Now, in terms of democracy movement spreading, you mentioned earlier, what senior officials think here is that Algeria and Jordan are probably more in danger of succumbing to some of that turmoil. They are less concerned about Yemen and Saudi Arabia. They also want to take some some of this democratic energy and funnel it east, translate the revolution, help it translate from Arabic to Farsi, and that means Iran. You saw the White House really relishing the position that Iran seems to be in. Tom Donilon, the president's national security advisor, issued a pretty strong statement over the weekend saying by announcing that they will allow opposition protests, the Iranian government has declared illegal for Iranians what it claimed was noble for Egyptians. That's just another way the White House is trying to take some of this and be more proactive, not reactive, and funnel it towards Iran. The White House is also continuing to send signals to the Egyptian military that they need to do a variety of things. Number one, repeal emergency law. Also make sure that you start transitioning towards democracy and that the transition conversations include all elements of civil society. It has to be broad for it to be legitimate. Margaret?
Hans Nichols at the White House. Well, here in Egypt, the question is how to get the engines of this economy roaring once again. How do you even get them started? Really filling the basics, putting people back to work, putting food on the table. And our Laura Satrakian has been working that story. Laura?
Well, we know from every account that it's going to take years for this economy to recover, to get back to where it was just weeks ago. But when you talk to people on the street, their concerns are much more immediate. They've seen the shelves go bare. They've rushed to the banks to withdraw what money they can. And they were really talking about day-to-day life, putting food on the table, as you mentioned. So a sense here that this is an economy that's recovering from the ground up, but it's going to take a long road. Here's what we saw. The days after Hosni Mubarak have been days of celebration. But as Cairo gets back to normal and cars reclaim Tahrir Square, the hard work begins. Starting with the crippled economy. Credit Agricole counts the cost at $5.5 billion, 2% of GDP. Egypt's finance minister, Samir Radwan, says his own estimates will come in higher. His first priority, a stimulus package.
The idea is to use funds and wealth at the command of the state to attract the private sector. We need to create jobs for 650,000 to 700,000 a year. There is no hope that we can absorb these in the government, and we shouldn't.
Other ambitious plans are just coming together to spur tourism and hand out cash to compensate for 18 days of damage. But analysts fear that proposed solutions could create more problems.
I think in the short term you're going to have some populist policies coming into play, which is obviously going to be very inflationary.
It's inflation, a whopping 17% for food, crushing the quality of life and sparking massive unrest. But today's concerns are more basic, just having money in your pocket. This is the Han al-Khalili Bazaar. It's usually packed with people. On a normal day, you can barely squeeze through that entrance. But it's also the historic heart of commerce in Cairo, and now it's empty. All of the customers, tourists, are gone. The shopkeepers tell us they've been busy in Tahrir Square, bringing down Mubarak. But now they're idle and worried. Business is down 100%.
But now, no money and no honey.
To global investors, Egypt under a kind of military rule could have an upside of stability and enforced rule of law. The new government is cracking down on business bigwigs of the old regime, seizing assets and imposing travel bans as part of a corruption probe.
We are in uncharted territory. I think it's unclear where this all goes. At the end of the day, being anti-corruption does not mean being anti-business. So while we may have some fits and starts, in the long run this should be excellent for the Egyptian economy and for regional stability, hopefully.
Egypt's uprising has been called an earthquake throughout the Middle East. U.S. futures markets are just opening now. Adam Johnson is looking at some of the implications. Adam?
Well, Margaret, yeah, oil futures just opened. Let me get you right there. Not a lot of movement. If you take a look at the oil futures, they've moved, 10, 11, 12 cents. Not a whole lot there. And, of course, if you talk about what's happened over the past 4 weeks, well, down about 4%. There's the quote right now. Again, they've been open about 8 cents, or rather about 8 minutes. If you look at the S&P and the Dow futures, again, very little movement. In other words, the market's really taking kind of a wait and see. Now, if you look over at what happened overnight in the Far East, well, in Saudi Arabia, up about 14 basis points. Jordan, Oman, those markets down slightly. Again, Markets taking all this in stride. It's not a runaway, nor is it a sell-off. Look at that. It's a real mixed picture. Now, there are a couple of things we're going to want to watch tomorrow. The EGPT, that's the ETF that trades here in the U.S. That's been the go-to, effectively the de facto futures market. We're going to want to watch that. We're going to show you here the 1 month returns down, 8.8%. It was down 20%, so it's come way back. Also, Orascom Telecom and Egypt's largest city bank, those are the ones we're going to be watching. They all trade in London, and of course that EGP trades here in New York. So, Margaret, our eyes are on those markets for you.
Thank you very much, Adam Johnson, there in New York. Here in Egypt, the country's brand new finance minister is trying to come up with ways to jumpstart this economy that has really been handicapped by the past 2 weeks of protests, already not creating enough jobs. Our own Laura Satrakian spoke with Samir Radwan, who just 2 weeks ago was a developmental economist. You spoke with him the day before the appointment. Now he's had the job for 2 weeks. What's his plan?
It's been an incredible roller coaster for him. He talked about taking the reins of this economy and trying to figure out how to untie the knot and really advance some of these issues that drove the crisis that are now harder to solve. We had a long sit down talking about everything from foreign direct investment to how he's going to manage that budget with all this cash flow that's been stopped, from tourism, from all of these sectors of the economy that have functionally stopped. Here's some of that conversation.
You once said that this year Egypt had been on track for $10 billion of foreign direct investment.
Absolutely.
Where do you think you'll land?
We know we landed about 6. There are many ideas that can attract foreign investor, because in the final analysis, you have a large labor force. You have a big market, local market. The labor force needs a bit of training, yes. Needs a bit of skilling, yes. There's no doubt about it. But that can be done, and done quickly. You know, you need to develop, stop talking about small and medium enterprise like a cliche, and think of it as feeder industries and services. For me, the most important breakthrough should come through a very massive and realistic employment program. A program that aims at creating jobs, not for the sake of creating work and going back to state employment, which a disaster which we are grappling with until this minute. 6 million are working in the bureaucracy, and they are a hindrance. If you remove them tomorrow, we'd be better off, but you cannot remove them because it's some sort of a social security scheme.
Radwan did say he had pledges from the World Bank, the IMF, and the U.S. Treasury Department to pledge whatever it takes to help this economy get back on its feet. But I did press him when he said that the deficit would only swell around 0.5% without needing to dip into $36 billion in reserves to try to bridge between all this damage and the future prosperity he's hoping to climb toward. Here's more of what he had to say.
Our hope is that the economy picks up. If the economy picks up, this is the key. You know, I'd rather look at it this way. And if need be, yes, why not? There is no taboo. The major correction in Egypt is to seek justice in distribution of the fruits of growth. And that doesn't mean at all going back to socialism. On the contrary, the guarantee to achieving that is the private sector, but a productive private sector that employs people and pays its taxes and so on. That's not socialism at all. So there is no rolling back of reform. There is no relapse into state intervention.
How do you assure people that the next Egypt is not going to be bad for business?
You see, populism is the road to disaster. It's like having a party, a wild party, and then you wake up in the morning and you regret